Communication is the greatest ability for a communication in this organization process and for the success of any organization. Communication is the element that can make or break both personal and personnel relationships. Many companies have been closed because of the inability to communicate openly with their employees and failure on their part to treat that employees like human beings. For an executive, the importance of effective communication can hardly be overemphasized. It is an important prerequisite and has direct bearing on all the relationships in an organization. As the organization is intricate web of communications, I repeat this word, the organization is an intricate web of communication channels through which flow of information that influence solutions to problems, decisions, and major activities of the organizational activity. The structure of the organizational communication patterns directly or indirectly affects such issues as the following, which a few I am going to mention. Who communicates with whom? The number of different people with whom the individual communicates, how widely information is disseminated and shared, how much of how little information an individual typically processes, who is perceived to be influential or non influential, people's satisfaction with their roles and jobs. These are the major factors which will be influenced heavily by the style of communication, the system of communication adapted by an organization. The transmission process, being the first phase in the communication process, it involves interactia. Very careful consideration has to be done in selecting the right media for different messages. For example, if a message is a relevant particular unit, a simple circular to the unit alone is sufficient, whereas the other had where there is a necessity of communicating policy matters and important thing. Different style has to be adopted in conveying the whole organizational staff. The house magazine may be an ideal if the matter is on an urgent one. There are several media methods. There are several methods of communication to communicate and transmitting the ideas, feelings, suggestions, and informations of the organization. And equal importance, the reverse process also has to be initiated for the receiving the communication from down to the level of a worker to the level of a senior manager. Assuming what others intending to say, that humble to get the ending of the communicator in a very humble way are to be adopted. Opinions of people can color the form, nature, and content of the communication. I repeat this beautiful concept. Opinions of people can color the form, nature, and content of the communications. Some automatically convey a sense of greater urgency and importance, and others. A written message is safer, is surer, and more lasting than oral one. Confucius points out, I hear and I forget, I see and I remember, I do and I understand. This is a beautiful process has to be adopted by the organization. Hence, I repeat, I hear and I forget, I see and I remember, I do and understand. An effective message must be received, decoded, translated, and examined. This circuit is not complete until the message has been understood and acknowledged by all the levels of the managers and people who you are targeting that this message has to be transmitted. The reception process. When communication is discussed, most of the emphasis is placed on the transmission side, but the reception is just as important when a person is listening. It is usual that the mind is wandering because people normally talk of a rate of words, rate of communication, per the fastness of the communication. To become a better listener, to become a better listener, therefore requires a bit of concentration. The manager should take some extra time to analyze and evaluate what is being said. What is being said? The following points may be useful to check the wandering minds and attract them to listen, to concentrate, and brood over on the subject which the chief manager has communicated to the other people. Number one, looking for the main points of the talk. Number two, facts must be separated from opinions because the mind is going to faster than the speaker's voice. One can analyze what is being said and what is being heard, what is being received. This process deserves more emphasis on the ways and the methodology adapted in receiving the concentrated mind of the listener. The listener has to grasp the content between the lines and help to ascertain what is the speaker really trying to say, what is the organization actually want to transmit and communicate to the people. Normally the tendency must be to evaluate. While there is a great deal of talk about communication in organizations, usually there is a very little analysis made of what factors these organizations promote to impede communications. The major barrier of mutual interpersonal communications is our very natural tendency to judge, evaluate, to approve or disapprove the statement of the other person on other group. Consider the following points important. These points among them, mainly I will try to summarize how you are referring the point, how you are communicating the point, how the listener is listening, the ability of the listener, the quality of the listener, and the absorbing capacity of the listener. These things have to be evaluated before sending the communication. It is to be noted that although tendency to make evaluate is a necessity, but it is not being done in a stronger way to understand the stronger feelings. The more likely it is, therefore, it will be mutual element in the communication. There will be just two ideas, two feelings, two judgments missing each other in psychological space. That psychological space between the communicator and people who are receiving communication has to be bridged with a proper bridge of communication system and methodology. When a person is not emotionally involved and listening to a heated discussion, B often goes away of thinking, well, they actually were not talking about the same thing. That means the mind of the listener, the mind of the participant in your interpersonal communication, you are not able to catch and the concentration, specifically catching the concentration for the driving of your ideas and communication. Listening with understanding. This is very important in organizations. If there is any way of solving the problem of avoiding these barriers of interpersonal communication, real communication occurs and this evaluative tendency is unnecessarily should not be done, and where the evaluation tendency with a very primary methodology has to be avoided. When a listener with understanding, what does this mean is it means to see the expressed idea and attitude from the other person's point of view. Expressed idea and attitude from the other person's point of view. The sense how it feels to him. To achieve this frame of reference is regard to the feeling he is talking about. This has to be evaluated before communication itself. The feeling of the listener. The reference is regard to the thing he is talking about. What sort of content you want to communicate, how the content will react on the brains of the listener, and what is the psychological path you are adapting to impress his brain and to catch his attention. Stated so briefly, this may sound absurdly simple, but it is not. It is the most effective agent we know for altering the basic personality structure of an individual and for improving his relationships and his communications and others. If you can listen to what is told, if you can understand how it seems to him as well as to you, if you can have that personal meaning for him, if you can see the personal meaning for him to whom you are communicating, if you can sense the emotional flavor which it has for him, then you will be the realizing potent forces of change in him. This is what is the strike. This is what is the aim. That is, potent forces of change in him. Such empathetic understanding, our understanding with a person, not about him, is such an effective approach that it can bring about major changes in personality. The aim, the crux of the communication is change in his personality of a listener. It is suggested to have a small experiment which you can try to test equally at the quality of your understanding. The next time you get into an argument with a person with whom you are communicating, your friend or your subordinate or anybody, or in the organization, any person, with a small group of friends, just to stop the discussion for a moment for the experiment and ask and check up what is the level of absorbing which your communication had an impact on the mind of the listener. So, need for a change in several approaches. Let us discuss very briefly. In the first place, it requires courage, a quality which is not too widespread. If you really understand another person in this way, if you are willing to enter his private world and see the way of life appears to him without any attempt to make evaluate judgment, you run the risk of being changed yourself. You might see it this way, you might find yourself influenced in your attitudes or your personality. But there is a second obstacle. It is just when emotions are strongest that it is most difficult to achieve the frame of reference of the other persons or a group. When the parties to a dispute realize that they are being understood, that someone sees how the situation seems to them, these statements grow less exaggerated and less defensive, and it is no longer necessary to maintain the attitude. I am 100% right and you are 100% wrong. This attitude is always bad and it plays very negative role for a communicator. In this way, mutual communication is established and some type of agreement becomes much more possible. Unless if you avoid this approach and build a beautiful bridge, this can be done. That is, a way of mutual communication can be established with whom you are communicating, and some type of agreement becomes much more possible. Above all, the most powerful communication is not what we say or what we write, but what we do. It is not what others are told, but what they accept and believe. I repeat this. It is not what others are told, but what we do and what we accept and how we make them to believe that your practice that will communicate it in a beautiful way compared to any other methodology. People can do almost everything if they want to do, if they are trained to do it and understand the reason for doing it. If we can make them to understand the reason for doing it, an executive cannot expect his staff to be punctual if he is habitual latecomer. And for that matter, is cannot expect the employees to be neatly dressed if he is not dressed well. This is a simple example I am giving. This applies to the level of any concept, implementation of any philosophy, any philosophical tendency of an organization, any new methodology adapted by the organization. Unless the senior manager is an example by implementing the process, it cannot attract the attention and make the people, make his colleagues or the teams to understand and implement. Finally, the successful pointing out in one of the slogans is implement and communicate. The senior managers have to implement and communicate. Without your personal implementation, your team cannot accept it as a philosophy required for the organizational change. Unless they are convinced that your new communication or a communication method is valid and useful, unless you implement and becoming an example of your communication. Thank you very much.